There's a lot of talk online about short books and very long books, but medium books don't get a lot of listicle love. So that's what we're talking about today on the Life on Books podcast. I'm your host, Tony. With me, as always, is Andy, a.k.a. Metafictional Meathead.
Good afternoon, Tony.
Good afternoon. This posed an interesting dilemma, picking out the best medium-length books, because a lot of books fall into that category.
Yeah.
So I think probably for both of us and anyone listening, the majority of the books you read probably fall in that 300 to 500 page range, which means you're going to read some good books, but also some books.
Yeah, I think I messaged you about this the other day when we landed on this topic. I ran into a little trouble making my list, at least out of the gate, because I was just kind of scrolling through my Goodreads to kind of preemptively come up with my list.
Yep.
And going through a lot of my favorite books that if we were just to kind of talk about books that we love without any sort of page count parameters, would either be above 600 pages,
right,
or under 300 pages,
right.
Just, you know, my personal taste, not really have in the book, not really anything to do with the pagination. And I was scrolling through, and a lot of the books that I had marked as read in that 300 to 500 page were books that I thought were good, but not great. Probably not ones that I would put on any kind of favorites list.
Sure.
And there were a lot that I was like, or there not a lot, a small handful where I was like, oh yeah, I really loved this book. This will be a good one. And I looked, it was like 550, and I was just like, so close.
And it's tempting to kind of be like, well, it's close, but
yeah.
I mean, look, we're just picking these numbers arbitrarily,
right?
300 to 500, but we did an episode about short books, and we kept it to like 200-ish and less.
Yeah. And we did well with that. I don't think either of us picked anything that was over.
Yeah, I think maybe there was one on my list that it kind of like depended on the edition that you had.
Yeah.
And there's kind of something like that here today as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, we're going to do an episode in the future about long books, and I'm not sure what the page count will be on that. It's certainly not going to be 500 plus, because again, it feels kind of silly to be like, oh, it's 501.
Right.
Let's put it in the big book category, but we'll figure that out. Anyway, let's start as we typically do with the reading update. We didn't do one in the last episode because we did the our best books of the 21st century, and we had so many books to cover because we did a top 10 for each of us, and plus the 5, we each picked 5 that we want to read from the 21st century.
We had a lot to talk about that week.
So we skipped the update. So why don't you start? What do you got reading?
Really all that I have been reading the last week or so has been Solenoid. I took a bit of a break from...
By Cartarescu.
Yes, Mircea Cartarescu. I took a bit of a break from Marshland, not for any particular reason. I mostly, I really want to finish Solenoid. You know, I've started it, I think at some point in June, maybe towards the middle of the month. And kind of starting and stopping. I think I said this last week, I've just gotten in the habit of reading way too many books recently. So I kind of wanted to put that one to bed. I'm enjoying it a lot, but I, wanted to just finish it and move on to the next one. So that's kind of been the bulk of my reading this week.
Cool. Yeah. Funny enough, I'm only reading one book this week as well. I had planned on finishing it up earlier in this week and starting something else, but I spent most of my day in the emergency room on Thursday. I'm fine. Thank you for everyone that reached out already. I'm just reading Death in the Andes by Mario Vargas Llosa. And it's interesting because he's quite a famous author, considered like the best Peruvian author for sure. But I think in general, just a very well-respected author of literature.
He is part of that Latin American boom.
Yeah, but he's got a ton of books. And so I think if people who are fans of his were to pick a book for you to read first, Death in the Andes probably would not be on that list. I did a little bit of digging on the critical reception of it just out of curiosity. I mean, I'd already purchased the book and decided to read it, so it didn't impact whether I wanted to read it or not. But it was kind of like a middle of the road. Like nobody came out and said this book sucks, but it just didn't get the same acclaim as Conversations in the Cathedral and Feast of the Goat, and some of his other more famous works. But what I'm finding after talking to you about kind of his writing style, because you've partially read Conversations in the Cathedral.
Yes.
A lot of the same style is employed in Death of the Andes. And I'm a little surprised by it. It's absolutely got literary qualities, but it's also a little bit of like a whodunit mystery, which is cool.
Okay, cool.
And so if you're not familiar with Llosa's writing style, a technique that I guess he employs in multiple books is, and we talked about this, is that two characters will be having a conversation while also flashing back to, that was not grammatically correct, flashing back to another event or conversation.
Right.
Which can be a little bit confusing. But I feel like once I got into the rhythm of that, I really started to enjoy it. And he is absolutely exceptional at dialogue. The book is incredibly funny. There's a very strong political theme because it deals with the Shining Path movement in Peru, which was kind of a hybrid political party / guerrilla group of communists, violent communists. And so it's got a lot of like Peruvian folklore in it. And I was going to tell you this while we were at Gibson's bookstore earlier, and this is a very, very mild spoiler. There's like just one very brief part in a book where someone's kind of like telling him of a folklore legend. Mm-hmm. And so in the book, one of the themes is pishtacos, which are these, I guess, kind of like hybrid, like psychos / they might be possessed by the devil type of thing. And they supposedly suck the fat out of people's bodies and then like use it for cooking. And so you can't really tell if it's like, this is something that actually happened and that people ascribed this kind of like otherworldly, ghostly nature to it, or if the whole thing's fabricated. But anyway, there's a character that's telling this very short story about a pishtaco that's terrorizing this town, and this guy comes to town. He's like, I'm going to kill the pishtaco. And they live, and for the record, I have no idea if I'm saying that correctly. I don't know how you would pronounce it, but anyway, the pishtaco lives in this cave, and he has these like slaves that he demands from the village. And he's like, if these women don't come and, live with me, I'm going to like kill your whole town or whatever. So this guy's like, I'm going to go into these caves. And they're like, well, how are you going to find your way out? Like, once you find him and kill him, how are you going to find your way back out? And one of the villagers is like, I know, I'll make you this stew that will basically make you have to shit yourself. And so as the guy's going through this network of caves, he's stopping every, couple minutes to like, and that's how he's going to like find his way out. It's like his own trail. And it's just like so absurd. It's not, it has brief moments of ridiculousness like a Pynchon or Catch-22. I would say on the whole, it's not throughout the entire book. Most of it's a little bit more mature than that. Yeah. But there's certainly these like ridiculous little bits of like lowbrow stuff. But again, kind of using that as a tool to tell a more in-depth story. So I'm loving it. I mean, it's I can tell already it's going to be probably in my top 10 for books I've read this year. So
yeah, well, I just ordered my copy half an hour ago.
Perfect.
So
yeah. And when you have an author that's got a big catalog like that, there's bound to be books in it that didn't receive much critical acclaim or fanfare, but are just very good.
Right.
So anyhow, let's get into our top 5 favorite medium length books. I have a bit of a disclaimer on this episode. We've done a top 5 favorite books of all time, and there's some crossover for me.
Okay.
So I tried to avoid that as best as I could. So, for example, Catch-22, which I believe is just under 500 pages, is my favorite book. I'm not speaking about that today. I just thought it was a little too redundant.
I didn't really run it. I have one book on my list today that was on my favorites all time when we did that episode. I was thinking about it just a few minutes ago when you were talking about how we'll probably do a big book episode in the future,
Yeah.
that's going to be my favorites list. Like I'm going to have to do some.
Same thing. There's one book for me that's a crossover, but I tried to pick books that were medium in length that I liked a lot, but maybe aren't like all-time favorites. Yeah. So that's my disclaimer. Why don't you tee it off?
Sure. I have got a book that is no stranger to the podcast, The Sympathizer by, you pronounce it because you're better at it.
Viet Thanh Nguyen.
There we go.
And I don't even know if that's 100% accurate.
Yeah, well.
And that was on, did that make your 21st century list?
No.
It was on mine.
It was on yours.
Yeah, and it was on the New York Times list as well.
Yes, and I believe I had said it was like certainly one of a book out of the 21st century that I really enjoyed. Mm-hmm. And had we been doing something more than just 10 books, if we had done 15,
sure,
it probably would have been on my list.
Yeah.
Just there were 10 that I felt were better or I enjoyed more.
Yeah.
So
just
missed the cut. But yeah, I mean, a great novel. Again, don't really need to get too much into it. We've discussed it at length, have a full episode about it. But it really packs a lot. I mean, it's what, 300 something pages? 385.
Yep.
And, packs a lot into that as far as character development and narrative.
I thought that cracked the 400 mark. No?
No.
Okay.
No. So,
yeah, great novel.
Yeah.
Obviously, Vietnam is a sore subject for America, but I thought I still think it's so important for people to kind of get some of the perspective from the other side.
Yes.
Because even though I think most people at this point kind of accept that Vietnam, from America's standpoint, what we did there was a mistake, I still think there's like a bit of patriotism around that event that doesn't allow people to really fully acknowledge a lot of the
right. And I think
that went down.
Kind of on the note of what we were discussing when we talked about Tree of Smoke last week, it's about the Vietnam War, but there's not, or more so that period of time without really getting too much into the actual warfare or combat or anything like that. I mean, same thing as Tree of Smoke. There's bits and pieces, but the actual, combat is not like a main feature of the book.
Right.
I think it's a really interesting perspective on that and unique perspective on that period of time. I think I had said this to you off the air when I had started reading it right after you finished it. I kind of felt like it gave me that kind of vibe of 1984, not so much in the narrative or thematic qualities, but that, 1984 was banned in America,
right? Because
it was viewed as communist.
Yes.
And it was banned in the Soviet Union because it was viewed as anti-communist. Mm-hmm. And I could very, very easily see something similar happening with this book. I don't think I would ever see it getting banned. I hope not. I mean, maybe if, depending on how the next few years shake out.
Sure.
But, depending on the reader and more so the culture they live in, I could see someone being like, oh, this is a pro-communist book.
Right.
Or someone being like, oh, this is an anti-communist novel. So
yeah. No, actually, I'm going to rearrange my order here very slightly because this will dovetail nicely. Are you good?
I'm good.
So one of my picks is Last Boat Out of Shanghai by Helen. This is a nonfiction that came out in 2019, or I believe, and just under 500 pages. Certainly under 500 once you take out the bibliography. But this is about the Communist Revolution and the Communist Party's takeover in Shanghai when they basically rolled into town and the nationalists had to flee. So Chiang Kai-shek's faction had to flee. They were in power. And it follows the stories of four individuals who all lived through this event. They didn't know each other, and they all were in very different kind of life circumstances in terms of money, their family's position in society, their political affiliations. And so it's an nonfiction. It's very historically accurate. However, it is very narrative based because you're following these four people's stories and how they developed after the takeover in Shanghai. And what is very similar about this book to The Sympathizer is people kind of retrospectively think, especially in America, like communists bad, and therefore like whatever was on the other side of communism in that region must be good.
Right.
But in China, Chiang Kai-shek's faction and the nationalists, they were not treating the citizens well either. And there was a lot of people just kind of caught in the fray. It was kind of a damned if you do, damned if you don't situation. I feel very similarly about Vietnam, and especially if, you lived in the South, but maybe sympathized with the Communist Party and their gripes with what was going on, or vice versa. And very similar in Korea as well. People that didn't really have super strong political affiliations one way or the other, who just got caught in the crossfire when North and South Korea went to war. Same thing in China. Same thing in the Sympathizer that's kind of highlighted a bit. What really stood out to me about the Sympathizer, to go back to that book very briefly, was that you don't really ever think about the South Vietnamese that had to flee when Saigon fell. Like, there's so much talk about what America did in Vietnam, and there's so much talk about the negative impact and the PTSD of the American soldiers, but there's like nobody ever gives any credit to or sympathy to the South Vietnamese who had to come to America as refugees.
Right.
Were probably treated like crap.
Terribly.
Because people are just like, you're Vietnam. There's no South or North to me. You're just Vietnamese. You represent Vietnam to me. But yeah, last boat out of Shanghai, Helen Zia. If you're looking for a very narrative driven nonfiction, I highly recommend this book. I really enjoyed it. So
nice.
On to your next pick.
All right. My next pick is All the Pretty Horses by Cormac McCarthy.
Great choice.
Yeah. This one's just made the mark at 304 pages.
Yep. Just snuck in there.
Just snuck in. Yeah. We both read this last year. I think I talked about it a little bit last week, but, typical Cormac McCarthy fashion.
Is that the Booker Prize that it won?
National Book Award.
Gotcha.
It's very terse and to the point.
Mm-hmm.
Simple is a little reductive and kind of underselling it, but, not, like I said last week, not very grandiose, not the super maximalist style.
Yeah. I kind of often think of Cormac McCarthy as like evolved Hemingway.
Yeah.
Like the next evolution of a Hemingway,
Yeah.
I mean, maybe that's a controversial statement, but I think he's better.
I forget I saw something a little bit off topic. I saw something the other day on Instagram. I forget exactly what it was, but someone asked like Chat GPT if who would win in a fight between Cormac McCarthy and Ernest Hemingway.
Yeah.
And I forget what the limiting factor for Hemingway was, but for McCarthy, it was he can only throw as many punches as quotation marks as he's used across his body of work.
Brutal.
So like ChatGPT was like breaking down what the whole fight would look like. But to go back to All the Pretty Horses, compared to some of Cormac McCarthy's other work, especially something like Blood Meridian, which I think he's most well known for.
Yeah.
Much more accessible.
Yes.
Pretty to the point narrative wise, but you get a lot of great character development, a really good look at life for I wouldn't necessarily say rural, but,
a ranch hand.
Yeah, ranch hand.
Yeah.
blue collar type American during.
Does it take place in the 60s?
Oh, it's got to be. I don't know. Actually, I think I assumed it was earlier than that.
It could be,
but I don't know if the year is ever given. But yeah, just and again, similar to what I was saying about the narrative and how it grips you without any sort of like really intense, heavy prose to draw you in. You get the same thing with the landscape, like.
Yeah, it's almost like reading a painting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But again, like I think sometimes with a lot of more maximalist, authors that we've talked about, or novels in general that we've talked about that really paint a vivid description of the setting, it's very verbose and not necessarily in a bad way. Like they get very descriptive talking about the landscape. And with McCarthy, it's just straight to the point.
Yeah.
This is where the setting is. This is what, the backdrop looks like. But it's just painted so vividly.
Yeah.
You really get a sense of the setting, the landscape that the character's in. And I think part of that is just typically the setting that he writes in is generally more or less desolate.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
There's not a lot of need for a very wordy description. So
yeah, I think you and I we talked about this book on the podcast prior, but I think one of our kind of nitpicks with it was that there's a handful of Spanish in there.
Yeah.
And there's no real way to know what they're saying other than just typing it into a translator.
Right.
Which I did not do if I could help it.
I don't think I did at all. I'm sure a much more avid McCarthy fan out there can sound off and give us a little bit more reasoning behind that and why it makes sense in the context of his style, not just within this novel, because he does it in more than just this novel.
Yeah, this is a great opportunity to remind our audience that we're just a couple idiots talking about books.
Yeah.
Somebody tagged me in a story the other day saying, thanks. I had shouted them out to, hey, go follow this person. Marcus is reading on Instagram. And he said, oh, thanks everyone for the follows. He's like, I'm not as much of an expert as Tony. And I was like, whoa,
hey, let's pump the brakes.
I'm a college dropout, buddy.
I graduated college, but my degree is in bench press and bicep curls.
That's right. That's right. And Andy's still recovering from all the grief you guys gave him on social media about his mispronunciation of Buendia. So, but I digress. Great book. First of a trilogy.
Yes.
But you can read it by itself as a standalone.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And I think if
the other two are The Crossing. It's the Border Trilogy is the name of it. And it's The Crossing and what is the third one?
The Plains?
I think that's right. Oh, God of the Plains? Is that what it is?
You start talking about your next book.
Okay.
I'll look it up. And I was just going to say real quick, if any of our listeners have not read any McCarthy yet,
good place to start.
Good place to start.
Yeah,
not his first novel, but a good place to start.
I think a lot of people probably pick up The Road first because that was a very popular book and a movie as well. But that is just a bleak story. So All the Pretty Horses.
Cities of the Plain.
Cities of the Plain. That's right. The Road is bleak and All the Pretty Horses. It has some rough moments, but it's not like that. So next on my list is a book we've been hyping up quite a bit this year. That is Hard Rain Falling by Don Carpenter. 308 pages. This was his debut novel in the 1960s. I was absolutely blown away by this book. I know you were too.
Yep.
And as was pretty much everyone in our book club, the Life on Books book club. If you're interested in joining, comment below and I'll send you the information. It's free. I don't think anybody in the group, the book club, said I didn't like it.
I don't think anyone even had anything like remotely negative to say.
Yeah.
I don't think we even got I liked it, but type statement. I think everyone just heaped praise upon praise on it.
Yeah. And so if you're not familiar, it's loosely about, without giving too much away, it's about, thank you. kind of a down on his luck guy. He's an orphan, toxically masculine, on par as far as racism goes for a white person in the 1940s, 50s, 60s, and just kind of about, how he struggles through life and the relationships he has. I don't want to give too much away, but somebody did comment on TikTok and said that they felt like this book was a way for the author to exercise his biases in the name of character exploration. I totally respect everybody's opinion. We all experience books in different ways, but I am just not sure how you get to that conclusion after reading this book.
I would agree. I think that's something. There are certainly works that you can read it and are like, "Oh, this author has some strong feelings about certain types of people."
Yeah.
I think we had a discussion similar to this in the unfortunately lost episode we recorded with Krista.
Yes. We got to get her back on the show.
She talked a lot about Flannery O'Connor.
Yes.
And how she was extremely racist. I read some of her short stories and picked up right away, like, oh, this author is very racist. Like it didn't ever seem to me like something that was crucial to pointing out the type of person a character was.
Right.
And when we had that that discussion with her, one of the books I brought up, one of the books that I think is most generally brought up having this kind of conversation is Huck Finn.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I remember having this conversation about it when I read it as a sophomore in high school in my English class. Like as uncomfortable as it can be in this day and age to read a novel that is just chock full of the N-word. I don't think you can fully and successfully make the point that Twain was trying to make.
Sure.
Without having characters in that novel that are extremely racist.
So I think the differentiating factor for me is you have to ask yourself the question, did Don Carpenter incorporate the N-word frequently in his book because he felt it was socially acceptable to refer to black people as the N-word? Or did he use it to reflect the context of the time that the book takes place in and highlighting just how bad the racism was during that time?
Exactly.
It's like a Flannery O'Connor is probably using it because she can get away with it.
Right.
You know what I mean? And that's just how people, during her time period referred to people of color. And certainly in the 60s, I would imagine when Don Carpenter wrote Hard Rain Falling, I assume it would be not socially acceptable for him to use the N-word, but like people probably wouldn't make that big a deal of it if he did,
right,
out in public or whatever. But that's not why he's using it as an author.
Right.
He's using it because the character in his book is a freaking racist.
Right.
So,
right.
And not in a good way. Like he's not saying like, look how cool this racist is.
Right. Absolutely. So, yeah. But yeah, like you were saying, a great novel. I pretty strongly considered putting it on my list.
Yeah.
I think the only reason I didn't, which I guess is maybe a little hypocritical since I have the sympathizer on here, but it's a book that we have a full episode about.
Sure, yeah.
We've talked about at length. I kind of wanted to mix it up a little bit.
Yeah, but I had the same feelings, but I was like, I have to do it.
Yeah, I think I had 4 of these books picked out, and the sympathizer was my 5th pick. Like, I was looking around my shelf this morning, and I was like, oh yeah, I really like that. Like,
yeah.
So, and another book that popped into my head, you were talking about Hard Rain Falling that I absolutely could have and maybe possibly should have put on my list is our next pick for the book club, Omen Setter's Luck.
Yeah.
So I've talked about that before. We'll end up doing a whole episode about it.
Makes sense.
I don't really need to get into it right now. But
sensible decision. What do you got there?
I have got another one that I have mentioned before. I think I read from it when we did our favorite quotes episode. I have got Been Down So Long, It Looks Like Up to Me by Richard Fariña. Again, just a fantastic novel. Kind of a forgotten cult classic of the Beat era. It centers around the main character, Knossos Papadopoulos.
What a name.
Who, again...
He got that one right, ladies and gentlemen.
Very, very...
maybe, I don't even know.
I hope so. A very beatnik type of person who kind of just goes out on this very Kerouac-esque excursion across the country, or out into the world, I should say, and then returns back to the university that he's a student at, which is pretty heavily based around Cornell.
Yeah.
And just kind of his experience coming back into that, trying to find his place, getting involved in all of the student movements. It does take place during the Vietnam era. That war does come up, and in ways that would be major spoilers, so I won't get into that too much. But, and there's, student protests on campus about...
what's that like?
Yeah, right. The campus is trying to limit how much time male and female students can spend together, and just in general kind of putting pretty strict parameters in place about that and other, social aspects of living on a college campus. So the students are kind of organizing against that. And, people talk a lot about what the 60s was like, and kind of has that atmosphere again, but like on a college campus. So you think about what college kids are like, what the 60s were like, and then you put that together. But just kind of a trippy book and a bit psychedelic. And
interestingly, I've been trying to mix in more content on my Instagram of more than just videos. So I've been posting like slides of like questions and stuff like that. And one of the questions this past week was, what's a book you'll never read? And a lot of, like, more than 3 or 4 people said anything by the Beats. They're like, I hate the Beats. And I was like, that's weird. I don't know. I mean, I guess I get it. Like, you don't like a style, you don't like a style. But I feel like even within that movement, there's a good amount of like diversity in writing style.
Yes.
So,
yeah, I think we had this, I don't remember if we were talking about it on the air, or if it was just one day while you and I were out and about, like, I read On the Road. I really enjoyed it at the time. I don't know if I would enjoy it as much now.
Yeah.
I think it is it's a good book. I'm not going to be like, oh, looking back, it was like a terrible book. I do still think it was a good book. I just think it's and maybe a little stereotypical, but it's such a good book that resonates with any young person.
Yeah.
Kind of feeling lost in the world and trying to find their footing, and not so much of like a coming of age tale, but just kind of like having that, wanderlust and thinking, I think we were all at some point in our late teens, early 20s, just kind of like, I'm just going to get in the car with a friend and drive and see where we end up. And
yeah, I mean, if you think of something even like the Latin boom, like Gabriel Garcia Marquez and Mario Vargas Llosa are both part of the Latin boom. their books are nothing alike.
Right.
I'm not super well versed in the beats, but it's just like, all right. I mean, I don't know. It's kind of a weird like thing that, I don't know. I just think it's strange.
No, I think that's a weird thing to discredit, but
to each their own.
also would be remiss to not mention it. Farina and our good pal Tommy Ruggles we're
37 minutes in at the first Thomas Pynchon mention.
We're
Cue the celebration.
good friends at Cornell. Pynchon wrote the introduction to this edition. The introduction is actually, I think, where the introduction to this novel is where I learned about another novel that I'll talk about in a little bit.
Okay.
But it's actually kind of interesting. I bought and read this book long before I had ever heard of Pynchon, or had any, obviously didn't have any interest in him. I hadn't heard of him. And I remember I read this well before I was an avid reader, and it was before I learned to stop reading the introduction.
Right, because it spoils it
And
90% of the time.
Pynchon does that. It's not super specific, but he does kind of spoil some things. And I was just like, this asshole.
This goddamn Tom Pynchon.
Right. So
How did you come across this book then?
So it's kind of a funny story. Around the time I ended up acquiring this copy, was around when Drake released the song Fake Love. And there is a lyric in that song called Been Down So Long It Looks Like Up to Me.
Seriously?
Yes.
Wow.
And
Is it a reference to the book?
no.
Okay.
I believe it's actually a song by The Doors.
Okay. Gotcha.
But I remember like hearing...
That's probably referencing the novel, right? Or maybe the novel's referencing the song.
I don't know if there's a direct reference in any of that.
I thought Drake might be cool for a second, but apparently not.
No, he's definitely not. But I remember, like thinking that was kind of a cool and interesting lyric.
Yeah.
And I just typed it into Google, and I think I first saw the Doors song, and then somewhere in my Google search, this novel came up.
That's so funny.
And I was like,
what are the odds of that?
sounds interesting. I'll buy it.
And now you're the biggest Thomas Pynchon stan.
Right.
And that was his only book, right, Farina?
Correct. He died in a motorcycle accident less than a week after it was published.
Ooh, wear your helmets, kids. We said it last time. Wear your helmets.
There are some people out there, depending on the day and the weather. I'm one of them. So he was riding on the back of the motorcycle. He was not driving it.
Okay. Beta.
There are some people out there who think because of his involvement in certain political movements of the time that the driver might have been connected to a certain 3-letter organization who intentionally wrecked to throw Farina off the back.
Wow.
And kill him.
Jeez. I mean, there's certainly easier ways to knock people off, I think, but as somebody that rides a motorcycle, it would be challenging to get somebody thrown off a bike without also injuring yourself quite severely.
Apparently, again, and I'm not,
Yeah,
don't quote me on the accuracy of this.
sure.
Some of the people who fall into the camp that he was killed intentionally stated that was a common tactic or a not uncommon tactic.
I'll have to investigate this because, again, I can't think of too many ways. I mean, if you rip a wheelie and someone's not expecting it, but you have to be pretty talented on a motorcycle to wheelie a bike in general. Never mind with somebody on the back. I don't know. I'll have to look into that.
Yeah. But also going back to the very kind of unique and kind of bass-ackwards tale of how I learned about this book. And I think I just ordered it on Amazon.
Sure.
It's out of print now.
Yeah.
It's
when
actually,
you talked about it, I was like, oh, I want to read that. And then I couldn't find it.
Yeah. It's actually pretty hard to find. The retail on this edition was $17, the last I searched, the cheapest I could find a copy of this edition, let alone any ones that were published earlier, was like $40.
Jeez, yeah.
So
crazy. Well, hey, hold on to that. Maybe it'll keep going up in value.
yeah.
This is a great time to talk about the fact that we don't have a sponsor for the podcast. And so we appreciate everyone's support. And if you want to support the podcast, the best way to do that is to make sure that you like and subscribe to the channel and share this video with a friend. Post it to your Facebook or Instagram stories or wherever you post things on the internet. Sharing the content is the best way to do that. If you're listening on a podcast platform that has the ability to give us a rating, that is also very impactful. So just being a fan and engaging, that's the best way to help us out. So my shameless plug is done, and I'm going to pick up a very basic biatch book, which is A Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens. I'm not big into 19th century lit. I think Dickens is pretty cool. This is definitely my favorite by him. My Dover Thrift Edition is only 292 pages, but I know. But there are editions that clear 300. I think initially it made the 300 mark.
Yeah.
So I cheated a little bit. Not too much to say about Charles Dickens and A Tale of Two Cities. If you're not familiar with it, I think it's my favorite book by him from what I've read of his work. It's about the French Revolution, which was actually inspired by the American Revolution. A lot of people don't know that. It's heavily dramatized. It's there's a lot of beheadings, probably more so than actually took place, but dramatized, by the way. It's fairly readable. I know Dickens is kind of like the quintessential what the heck is this guy talking about writer.
Yeah.
Very flowery prose and in-depth descriptions, but I think it's a very readable book. So, what hasn't been said about A Tale of Two Cities?
Right.
So,
I haven't read it. So
you could say that.
I don't really have anything to add other than I have a copy.
Nice.
So,
all right. What's your next pick?
I think I bought it at the Chichester Library.
Fantastic.
Yeah. My next pick is a book I have briefly talked about on the air. Another one similar to Farina's. I read from it when we did our favorite quotes episode by an author that I have talked about a lot. It is Libra by Don DeLillo. It is probably my favorite DeLillo book of the 4 that I've read. It is based around a hypothetical scenario in which the CIA plots an attempted and eventually confirmed assassination of John F. Kennedy.
A presidential assassination. Wow.
Yeah.
Who knew we'd be able to somehow bring that up in a book podcast?
Yeah. I brought my tinfoil hat over for this episode.
So timely.
Yeah. So yeah, it starts off with the players and actors within the intelligence apparatus, because they're not all directly CIA. They're connected. Mm-hmm. Originally it's just to have it be a failed attempt, so the U.S. government can go, these people tried to kill the president. They're, Cuban sympathizers. Now we can actually invade Cuba.
Yeah. Definitely never heard a conspiracy theory like that before or recently.
Never. So it's just a very, compelling and gripping narrative. DeLillo does a great job of intertwining Lee Harvey Oswald and his life, basically from like late childhood, early adulthood into his enlistment enlistment into the U.S. Armed Services. I forget which branch. I think he was a Marine. He was a Marine. Yeah. In his enlistment in the Marines, and then the kind of behind the scenes stuff of those players and actors I was talking about, and how they're all interconnected in some way. I said this when we were when we talked about the novel and when we had Ed on, but I felt like this was a much more, or excuse me, Same Bed, Different Dreams reminded me a lot of Libra, just in the way that it examines history, who writes history, what is the, how black and white is it really? You get, I think there's, kind of the old adage when two people have any sort of disagreement or falling out, there's his side, your side, and the truth.
Yeah.
And I think this, again, kind of examines that, but from history. You know, where is the actual truth in history? So just a phenomenal novel. One of the things that I love the most about it, and I think I referenced this when I read the quote from it, is it really paints Lee Harvey Oswald as kind of your typical everyday American who wants to be a person of substance, almost like a cultural icon, and gets kind of caught up in just being pulled in two different directions by opposing forces.
Yeah.
So just a phenomenal novel.
Yeah. I haven't read Need DeLillo yet, but that one might be my introduction to him. I know a lot of people say White Noise is a good place to start, but the topic of that book is a little more interesting to me, I think.
Yeah, so. I think you would really like, I think you would like most of DeLillo's work, but I think you would really enjoy Libra.
Yeah. So my next pick is another nonfiction, and this is a book that did make my top 5 favorite books of all time. And that is This Is a Man / The Truce by Primo Levi, who was a Holocaust survivor. He was interned to Auschwitz, and he was an Italian chemist, quite a brilliant person. And this is a memoir about his time in Auschwitz, and just a extremely well-written book, devastating, heartbreaking, page-turning. There's not too much else I can say about it other than go listen to, I think I talk a little bit more in depth about it on the podcast where we talked about our favorite books of all time. But just one of the books I look back on, it like fundamentally changed me as a reader and a person and everything. And Primo was a genius. Rest in peace.
Again, another book that I have that I haven't read.
And it's a very literary nonfiction, I would say.
I think I do a pretty terrible job of following through with most of the books that I say, like, oh, I should read this. I really want to read this.
I think we all do.
Pretty much every time you talk about this, whether it's here on the air or like you and I just talking, having a conversation, I'm like, man, I should really read that book.
Yeah, I do think you would like it. It, again, kind of reads a little bit more, I don't know if narrative-based is the right term for a Holocaust memoir, but it does have a lot of literary qualities to it, I guess, in the writing. It's not just like a history book or a fast here's a book about me memoir, and every little intricate, boring detail about my mundane life. He just really does a deep dive on the psychology of surviving the camp, the other people he was interned with, the people who were enslaving them. It's quite remarkable, and it's just, it's brutal, obviously.
Yeah.
So, yeah. All right. What's your last pick? And just for the record, mine are not in any particular order. Again.
Yeah. My last, so Libra and the one I will reference here in a minute, I think they are far and away my favorite two
Sure.
out of the group, but the other three aren't in any really particular order. Even these two, I don't know if I would say 1 and 2, or it could be again depending on the weather. I might have a different pick.
Yeah.
I think this next one kind of shot up a little bit because I recently watched Tombstone, and
Great flick.
it reminded me a lot of this novel. Anyway, I alluded to it briefly when I talked about Been Down So Long It Looked Like Up to Me, a favorite of a collegiate Thomas Pynchon and Richard Farina. I'm talking about Warlock by Oakley Hall. This one comes in at 470 something pages, 471. So this is about a mining town in New Mexico. Yeah, New Mexico, or maybe Arizona. I don't know, somewhere in the Southwest, American Southwest.
Yeah.
Set in the late 1800s. And this mining town is being harassed by rustlers who live on a ranch just outside of the town. And they end up, the citizens kind of come together, and they end up hiring this former gunslinger as their town marshal.
Tales old as time.
Right. And, he's a popular and well-revered citizen within this town, but, you get that kind of, again, similar to like the movie Tombstone with Wyatt Earp, like he's well-respected by a lot of people, but then also a lot of people see the kind of negative side of this hard-nosed lawman who, well, he may be trying to keep the peace and some law and order. There is a lot of violence and destruction that surrounds him, which, is kind of a big theme of the book. And similar to what we had said about Hard Rain Falling, the writing is not like crazy over the top. This like beautifully well written novel. The writing is great, but there's nothing like special and crazy about it. Just does a great job, setting up the context and the setting, and you get a lot of character development within it. And one of the biggest themes and things that I really took away from it, and I think if you follow the Yellow Brick Road, you'll see where this novel really influenced Pynchon. It really examines the heroes of history and their morality and what is the true side of that history.
Yeah.
Morality
in that time period and place was quite ambiguous.
And that, again, it is a very ambiguous novel.
Yeah.
Not so much in the final outcomes, but the cause and effect of those, the difference between right and wrong, good and evil. On the surface, you have your marshal and rustlers that are terrorizing the townspeople. It seems like the law is probably good and the rustlers are probably evil, but how much truth is there to that? And or is it more of the marshals and the sheriffs and the deputies kind of flexing their morality and lawfulness and taking advantage of that?
Yeah.
There's also, I want to see when this was originally published. So this was originally published in 1958, and you do get a bit of kind of satire of, not necessarily McCarthyism, but there's like I said, it's a mining town. So there's a ton of miners within the town. and they are very clearly being taken advantage of by the people that own the town, or excuse me, own the mine. So they kind of start to organize.
Yeah.
So just a fantastic novel.
Nice. Yeah. I got to get around to reading it. I've had a copy for quite some time.
Yeah, you really do. I think you will really love it.
Cool. So the last book on my list is the best medium length book of all time. No, just kidding. I put it on the bottom because it was like literally like the physically biggest book. Kind of a more of a fun pick, less like dense or serious, I guess. That is Between Two Fires by Christopher Buehlman. This is an interesting kind of hybrid novel. It blends historical fiction with fantasy and horror, which are two genres that I'm not typically into, but he does it in a great way. It takes place during the Black Plague, and it's about kind of like a disgraced knight trying to find his way to safety, and the people that he kind of finds in his stead involuntarily. He's not really super happy about it, but now he's kind of like feeling like he has to keep these people alive. Just a fun, well-written, engaging book that doesn't have too much horror, doesn't have too much fantasy, doesn't have too much history, kind of a good balance of all those things. And I think it's the type of book that kind of like not really on a lot of radars, but a diverse amount of readers could read this and get some enjoyment out of it, which is why I wanted to include it on my list today. So yeah, Between Two Fires, Christopher Buehlman.
An epic tale of medieval horror.
Yeah. It's got some kind of religious themes to it in an interesting way. So
it's a dope cover too.
It is a dope cover for sure. There is like another edition of this, and I was like, nah, I gotta have this one because this is sick.
I gotta say, there's just something about a book with a red cover.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's funny. I think about this almost all the time. Especially anytime I read a book with a red cover. If any of our listeners are fans of the show New Girl,
not familiar with it.
One of the beloved characters. I mean, they're all beloved, but anyway, it comes to the rest of the roommate's attention that he owns a copy of Mao Zedong's Little Red Book.
Oh yeah, nice.
And
I might actually have a copy.
They ask him, they're like, "Why do you have this?" And he goes, "You see a book with a red cover, you buy it." And I think about that almost anytime I read a book with a red cover.
Yeah.
Because I almost have like a perfect average with anytime I've read a book with a red cover. I don't think I've read a red book that I didn't like.
That's amazing. Speaking of books that you might be ashamed to, or people might question why you have, we were with our friend Gunnar today. He was donating a bunch of books to a library, and I was going through his boxes to see what I wanted to take, and there was a copy of Mein Kampf in there. And I was like, dude, this is gonna make the national news. I was like, this is just gonna get thrown on a shelf in this little library's bookstore, and like some kid's gonna be like, what's this? And there's gonna be like
the poor people at the Chichester Public Library.
Yeah. Amazing. Anyway,
Gunnar does not exactly, our friend Gunnar does not exactly look like the type of person that can be like, oh, I want to have a copy because of the history or whatever crockpot reason someone can have for owning Mein Kampf.
Yeah. So anyhow, anything else you want to discuss today?
I don't think so. Kind of went with a quick one today. So
record time.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for listening. What are your favorite medium length books? I know it's a big pool to choose from, but let us know if you've read any of these on our list, and you will see us next time.
What's our start date for Omen Setter? Are we doing that tomorrow or is that next week?
Monday.
Monday? Okay.
Today's Saturday, right? Yeah, Monday.
Today's Saturday.
Monday's the official start date.
Okay.
So yes, Monday.
This episode will be out by then, but 22nd.
Yeah, Monday the 22nd of July. It's a 4-week read. So if you're hearing it anytime during late July, early August, feel free to hop in. And it's a fairly short book, although somewhat dense, I believe, right?
Yeah. It's about the same length as Hard Rain Falling, but definitely more of a dense and not like super dense and challenging read, but definitely more of a difficult book than Hard Rain Falling.
Cool. Well, thanks for listening. See ya.
Bye-bye.